The market, the muscle, and the mistake. The Bear Creek Farmers Market was just waking up. Birds chirped in the high cottonwood trees lining the lot. Sunlight poured golden light through leaves, and the soft rustle of tents being unzipped and crates being shifted filled the air. It was the kind of sleepy, small-town morning most folks dreamed about. Kids ran past with baskets, old-timers gathered for coffee at the bakery tent, and vendors called out hellos to their regulars. And then came the rumble. Not thunder, not trucks. Motorcycles. 5 of them, loud, aggressive, and tuned to announce their arrival like a war drum. People turned. Vendors froze. Parents instinctively pulled their kids closer. The sound of trouble was unmistakable. At the far end of the lot, a massive semi-truck had already rolled in earlier. It was an older model, faded blue with a silver stripe, rust along the bottom, a dent on the passenger side fender. Nothing flashy, nothing threatening. That was where Rick Mason stood, wearing a faded flannel shirt tucked over a belly that made most people underestimate him at first glance. His beard was gray and thick, his eyes hidden behind mirrored aviators. He moved slowly, unloading wooden crates from the back of his truck, with a kind of rhythm that suggested repetition, not urgency. A casual observer might think he was just another middle-aged hauler selling local produce to make ends meet. But that was the point. They didn't see the methodical way he stacked each crate, or the way he constantly scanned every corner of the market without turning his head, or how he never once let anyone approach within arm's reach without shifting his stance slightly. Rick Mason was no ordinary trucker. 22 years ago, he was a walking ghost. Delta Force, assigned to missions most presidents never knew happened. 10 years ago, he retired after a final operation in Kazakhstan that went sideways and left him with shrapnel near his spine and a promise to his wife. No more guns, no more shadows. But this morning, as the bikers circled the gravel lot like vultures, Rick felt his bones tighten like they used to in hostile zones. And somewhere inside, that switch, once buried under years of quiet living, began to flip. The lead biker rolled up with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. He cut the engine with a loud sputter and dismounted, his boots crunching gravel as he approached. He was lean, maybe 40, greasy ponytail tucked under a leather bandana. The Iron Jackal's emblem snarled from his vest, a jackal's skull with a dagger through it. His name was Dean Fang Archer, and he strutted with the air of someone who thought he owned the world. Behind him came Tank, an enormous, bald brute with tattoos crawling up his neck. 3 younger members followed, each trying to look tougher than the last. Fang's boots stopped 2 feet from Rick's stand. "You sellin' these for rabbits or people?" he said, eyeing the vegetables. Rick didn't flinch. "They're $2 a bunch," he said simply, stacking fresh carrots. "Grown just outside of town. Best you'll taste all season." Fang picked up a bunch of carrots, examined them, then tossed them into the dirt. "Oops," he said with a grin. "Guess I dropped it." Rick's jaw flexed. He moved slowly, picked up the carrots, brushed off the dirt, and set them aside. "That'll still be $2, he said calmly. Fang smirked. "You serious, fat boy?" The laughter from the other jackals echoed through the lot. A few vendors whispered. A young mother hurried her kids away. Clara Hastings, an elderly flower vendor beside Rick, froze with her pruning shears halfway in a bouquet. Tank stepped closer, cracking his knuckles. "You hard of hearing, old man." Rick looked up at him, then straightened. And suddenly, the air changed. Gone was the sleepy, slow-moving trucker. In his place stood something different, shoulders squared, feet planted, chin high. At 6'4" and 350 pounds, Rick became a mountain. His voice remained steady. "You want to talk? We can talk. But if you're here to bully people, you've picked the wrong market." Fang blinked. There was something in Rick's voice. Something off. That calm. That control. "I think this fat old man's got a death wish," Fang sneered. Tank took a step forward. Rick's hand twitched, just a flicker, barely noticeable. But it was enough. Tank stopped. Something primal, instinctual, kicked in. The big man hesitated, like an animal sensing another predator. Before anything else could escalate, woo-woo-woo. A police cruiser pulled into the lot. Deputy Mark Collins, Bear Creek's only patrol officer on duty that morning, stepped out with one hand on his holster. "Morning," he said, voice dry. "Did I miss something?" Fang threw up his hands. "Just enjoying the market, officer. Supporting local business." Collins eyed the bikers. Then he looked at Rick. "You good?" Rick nodded slowly. "For now." Fang chuckled. "Relax, deputy. We're leaving. Just wanted some fresh air." "Get it elsewhere," Collins said firmly, "before you start stinking up the produce." Grumbling, the bikers climbed back on their bikes. The engines revved. But just before they peeled out, Fang looked back at Rick. "I'll be seeing you, fat man," he said. Rick watched them ride off, his expression unreadable. Clara leaned over. "You okay, Rick?" He nodded. "Yep, just another market day." But inside, his mind was racing. The way Fang moved, the formation they arrived in, the way they tried to control space, it wasn't random. It was a dry run. And Rick had seen enough of those to know what came next. He glanced at his phone. A secure, custom-made device in his pocket buzzed once. A message flashed across the screen. "Meet at the yard. Urgent." Rick wiped his hands on a towel, nodded at Clara, and quietly packed his stand. He was no longer just a vendor. He was something else now. And Bear Creek had no idea what kind of war was about to start. The commander wakes. Rick Mason's semi-truck disappeared down the dirt road behind Bear Creek Market, sunlight bouncing off the windshield as dust kicked up behind his tires. But he wasn't hauling produce anymore. Inside the cab, his expression had changed. No longer the calm, friendly face that sold carrots and squash with a smile. Now, it was hard, focused, alive. The message on his secure phone was short, but that was all it took. "Meet at the yard. Urgent." Only 5 people had the ability to contact him on that line. Only 3 knew what the yard actually was. 10 minutes later, Rick pulled around a curve and slowed at an old logging road hidden by overgrown brush. A rusted "No Trespassing" sign hung crooked from a leaning fence post. It looked abandoned, forgotten. It was meant to. Rick stopped the truck beside a pine tree and walked to the fence. Without a second thought, he pulled off his glove and pressed his thumb against a small metal plate behind the sign. A green light blinked. The fence clicked open. The road wound through dense forest before opening to an old warehouse surrounded by tall grass and silence. Cameras hidden in birdhouses swiveled. Solar panels lined the roof. And a steel-reinforced security gate rolled aside with a mechanical groan. This was the yard. Not a place, but an operation. A fallback cell built by retired Special Forces operatives who still kept one eye on the world's shadow wars. A place where old soldiers like Rick didn't rust. They waited. Inside, 2 men were already around a wide table filled with maps, blueprints, and screens showing live drone footage. Sheriff Dale Monroe stood with a mug of black coffee in his hand. He looked like the sheriff from every Western movie. Weathered face, tall frame, tan cowboy hat. But the calm in his eyes was a veteran's calm. He wasn't just a local lawman. He'd once run operations in Colombia before trading combat boots for a badge. The other man, Paul Ramirez, was younger, sharper, and dressed like a warehouse manager. Clean shave, button-down shirt, clipboard always in hand. But behind those glasses was one of the FBI's best-covered analysts. Rick entered without a word, walking straight to the table. "Just as we feared," Ramirez said. "The Iron Jackals are staging something big. You were right. They're testing the market as a choke point. Multiple access roads, high visibility, soft targets. They're escalating, Monroe added. Our surveillance picked up movement from the gang's warehouse outside Granger. Unmarked SUVs. Convoys at 2 a.m. Someone's backing them. Rick nodded slowly, hands resting on the edge of the table. Fang's not just puffing his chest anymore. He's working a plan, and he's got the kind of discipline I haven't seen since Iraq. Ramirez pulled up a map of the region. We believe they're trafficking more than just small arms now. Satellite intel suggests container transfers, ammo crates, military-grade armor. This isn't local intimidation anymore. It's cartel-level distribution. And Fang's the middleman? Rick asked. Ramirez nodded. But he's not the top of the chain. There's someone higher up, someone funding them. We believe if we can trap the jackals in the act, we can trace the connection back up the ladder. Rick narrowed his eyes. Then we need bait. Monroe gave a grim chuckle. I figured you'd say that. You thinking what I'm thinking. Rick turned toward a digital whiteboard and tapped on the Bear Creek Market location. They already see me as a target. Fang felt disrespected. He'll come back. And this time, it won't be for tomatoes. He turned to them. We let them think they're in control. Then we take it all from them in one sweep. But we'll need timing, Ramirez warned. And coordination. This has to be flawless. Rick pointed at the board. We set the trap on my property. 20 acres, multiple entry points, covered positions. I've already upgraded the perimeter over the years. Monroe raised an eyebrow. You kept all that. Active. Rick gave him a look. Some things you just don't turn off. Ramirez smiled faintly. And here I thought you were just growing cucumbers. Rick turned serious. This isn't just for show anymore. Clara, the kids, everyone at the market. They don't know it yet, but their lives are in danger. Monroe nodded. Then let's get to work. Over the next 48 hours, Rick Mason transformed his quiet farmland into a modern-day fortress. The barn became a surveillance hub. Hidden tripwires connected to motion sensors. Drones hovered like silent hawks above the treetops. Old trenches were cleaned out and camouflaged, just like back in Kandahar. He called in favors, not from soldiers, but from veterans. Former SEALs, Rangers, and retired cops he'd worked with over the years. Men who knew how to move in shadows. Each arrived quietly. Each brought their own gear. One by one, they turned Rick's farm into a perfect battlefield. Meanwhile, Dean Fang Archer wasn't sulking. He was furious. The encounter at the market had spread across the gang like wildfire. Everyone heard how some fat trucker had stared him down and made him look weak. That couldn't stand. The jackals were more than a gang now. They were growing, supplying real firepower, and prepping to be regional kings of the underworld. And now, there was talk that the cartel backing them was watching closely, evaluating. Fang had something to prove. This old man thinks he can embarrass me, Fang growled, slamming his fist on the bar table in their Granger hideout. He's dead. We torch his truck, burn his land, and we leave a message. Tank grinned. You want me to take the boys tonight? Fang nodded slowly. We go heavy. Rifles, night gear, everything. He didn't realize Rick was already watching them. He didn't know about the drone just outside the window. And he had no idea the fat man he mocked was once nicknamed Ghostback, because no one who saw Rick Mason in combat ever saw him coming. Back at Rick's farm, night fell. Rain tapped on the rooftops gently. Inside, Rick stood at the barn center, arms crossed as he watched the monitors. His men were already in position. Sheriff Monroe had state troopers waiting 2 miles out, hidden in a canyon. FBI units were watching the roads. Everyone waited for one signal. Rick's. His phone buzzed. Inbound. 10 minutes. 2 SUVs, 10 bikes, all armed. He reached for his old combat vest, the one he hadn't touched in over a decade. His fingers ran along the stitched nameplate. Mason. Then he whispered to himself, Time to remind them who I am. The ghost back strikes. Midnight. A cold wind swept across Rick Mason's farm. The moon hung behind a curtain of clouds, and everything was dark, too dark. The kind of quiet that comes before war. From the tree line, headlights flickered. Then came the rumble. 10 Harley-Davidson motorcycles, engines snarling like wild dogs, followed closely by 2 blacked-out SUVs. Inside them were men, armed, cocky, and dead wrong. They thought they were hunters. But tonight, they were walking into the wolf's den. Rick stood alone in the center of his farmyard, the barn behind him. A single lantern glowed by his produce stall, like he was still just a simple truck driver selling vegetables. He wasn't. He was bait. And he knew it. The jackals didn't come slow this time. They roared onto the gravel lot in formation, tires spitting dust. Fang's bike stopped right in front of Rick, only inches away from his boots. Fang dismounted slowly, adjusting his leather gloves with that same mocking grin. "Well, well," he said, "you really are stupid, standing here all alone." Rick didn't move. "No need to be rude. I even turned the lights on for you." Fang chuckled. "Thought we have a little bonfire. Maybe toast some corn. Maybe torch your house." Behind him, Tank stepped out of the SUV with a short-barreled AR slung over his shoulder. The rest of the gang fanned out, guns drawn, silent, coordinated, too coordinated. Rick watched their movements, their discipline. He didn't just see bikers. He saw operators, and that meant only one thing: cartel training. Fang circled him like a shark. "You're gonna pay for embarrassing me. This farm, this fat truck driver act. It ends now." Still, Rick didn't move. His voice was calm, cold. "You think this is about pride, Dean?" Fang narrowed his eyes. "You're damn right it is." Rick took a slow step forward, towering over him. "No, it's about justice. And you just walked into it. CLITK. Fang froze. From every shadow, every corner, came the unmistakable sound of safeties being flipped off. Suddenly, floodlights exploded to life across the property, blinding white beams illuminating the entire battlefield. Before the jackals could react, red laser dots danced across their chests. "Drop your weapons," came a voice through a loudspeaker. It was Sheriff Monroe, hidden behind a reinforced squad truck along the south tree line. FBI agents swarmed from the west side, flanking the SUVs. Rick's team, former Special Forces, rose from camouflaged cover with suppressed rifles trained on every gang member. The jackals were surrounded. In 10 seconds, everything changed. Tank tried to raise his weapon. Rick lunged. What followed wasn't a punch. It was a controlled, brutal military takedown. Rick hit him with a center mass shove, twisted the rifle away, spun behind him, and dropped him with a chokehold so fast the others barely registered what happened. Fang stepped back in disbelief. "What the hell are you?" Rick looked at him, calm, measured. "I'm the man you should have left alone." The gang panicked. One fired a shot, wild and stupid. That was the last mistake. Non-lethal rounds burst from hidden FBI rifles, bean bags and rubber bullets slamming into gang members like hammers. Flashbangs erupted behind the barn and near the SUVs. One by one, the bikers fell, disoriented and shouting. Rick moved through them like a phantom, disabling 2 more with elbow strikes and precision holds. He moved like a man half his size, half his age. Every motion efficient, every strike calculated. By the time it was over, less than 3 minutes had passed, and every member of the Iron Jackals was on the ground, zip-tied and coughing. Dawn breaks on a new day. Blue and red lights filled the early morning as law enforcement processed the scene. From inside the SUVs, the FBI recovered crates of illegal weapons, tactical gear, and a flash drive containing detailed communications with the Mexican cartel. Ramirez stood beside Rick, flipping through the files. This is it. This is the link we needed. This flash drive names their supplier, and he's on our international watch list. Rick nodded, breathing slowly. Sheriff Monroe walked over, adjusting his hat. "I'll be honest. I never thought I'd see you in action again." Rick gave a faint smile. "Didn't think I'd have to. But sometimes the war finds you, even when you walk away." Monroe nodded. "You saved a lot of people tonight, Rick. Not just Bear Creek." Nearby, Clara Hastings arrived at the farm, basket of muffins in hand. She paused as she saw the wreckage. The vans, the lights, the men in tactical vests. She walked slowly to Rick and handed him a muffin. "Looks like you had quite the night." Rick chuckled. "You could say that." She looked at him for a long moment. "You're not just a truck driver, are you?" Rick met her eyes, that glimmer of mischief returning to his voice. "Only on Tuesdays." Weeks later, the Bear Creek market was back to normal. Kids laughed. Vendors sold fresh produce. The old bakery tent was open again. No one talked about the raid. Not directly. But word had spread. The jackals were gone. And the fat truck driver. Well, everyone still called him that. But now, they said it with respect. With awe. Because behind the belly and the flannel and the easy laugh was something more. Something dangerous. Something noble. Rick Mason was no longer hiding. He had proven that strength doesn't need to be loud. That courage isn't always visible. And that sometimes heroes look nothing like what we expect. Final scene. Back at the barn, Rick sat quietly with a coffee, watching the sunrise. His dog lay beside him. The fields were golden again. Safe. Ramirez had offered him a job. Full-time. Consulting. Rick had smiled and said, "Maybe someday." But for now, he was content. After all, the ghosts never sleep.